Today's episode is sponsored by Coros. Coros is the leading customer engagement platform. From social media to online communities to digital customer care, Coros helps companies authentically connect with customers. Coros connects consumer insights across departments and helps companies run their businesses with their customers, anticipating their needs and accelerating sales. Coros works with over 2,000 brands, including 52 of the Interbrand 100 companies, and powers over 500 million digital interactions every day. Check them out at coros.com. That's KHOROS.com. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. We have Matt Ricks, who is head of data-driven commerce at the HEINEKEN company. And I just need to point out that Matt's views are his own and don't necessarily represent his employer. So with the rampant formality out of the way, Matt, thank you so much for joining. Could you just give the audience a background on who you are and what you do?
Yes, of course. Thanks. Hello, Tom, and hello to everyone listening. That's such an ace and an awesome thing to be invited to do. So my name is Matt Ricks, as you've already said, as you've also already said, head of data-driven commerce at the HEINEKEN company in the UK. That's a pretty grandiose title, and basically what it means is that I do digital marketing. But the reason is that the difference is that I'm concerned with brand action. So my job is to get consumers to do stuff. It's to click a link or visit a website or visit a shop. But more and more, it's about visiting pubs. That's obviously distinct from a brand marketer who's concerned about getting people to feel stuff about brand. I'm getting people to do stuff. As the title also suggests, it is more and more increasingly involved with data, collecting data, housing data. Which I'm no expert at, but about strategies about utilizing and leveraging data through activity. Fairly non-traditional path to get me to where I am now, although probably everyone says that. I don't think there is a traditional path anymore, is there? But I graduated from Leeds University, a history degree in 2008. Anyone who remembers 2008 will remember it was the midst of a financial crisis, not that many graduate schemes knocking around at the time. So I kind of sort of fell into doing what I'd been doing part-time at university, and that was being a club night, and I used to book bands for a club, which is amazing. I mean, great when you're 21 and just
Sorry, Matt, just need to stop you there. Who did you book of note?
Lots of people. I mean, Leeds at that time was sort of the epicenter of sort of live music. It was one of the reasons that I sort of moved to Leeds. That's when sort of Kaiser Chiefs were coming up, and we had everyone through the club, from like the Killers and Amy Winehouse, the Libertines. I didn't book all those people, but I was certainly around at the time while those were around. And anyone who was at Leeds University at that time will probably have been at the Friday night club night I used to promote. But that was where I sort of cut my teeth really in sort of marketing. And while it was a lot of partying, a lot of late nights, it was also, meeting sort of, creatives and people who were passionate and sort of different ways of thinking about things. But also accidentally, it was a time when sort of social media marketing really became sort of a thing, right? So Facebook just launched Facebook ads, and I think we started using them, and that was one of the main reasons that the sort of our club was busy, was because we were kind of engaging with this sort of new and scary platform. If you want a timestamp, I started promoting the club on MySpace. That was when my digital marketing career started. So after that, I kind of moved away from marketing for a few years. A friend of mine was a chef, and he offered me the opportunity for us to go into business together, and I opened a pub. Moved from Leeds to London. At the ripe old age of 24, became a pub landlord, naive and overconfident. That was an amazing experience as well. Incredible hard work. Did that for a couple of years, was pretty successful in that. Opened another place on top of that, and then kind of Heineken came knocking, and I decided that I'd rather make a career sat down than stood up behind a bar. And here I am. Took a role at Heineken, initially in trade marketing, B2B customer marketing, but sort of lent into the sort of experience that I'd had in digital. And that was kind of when Heineken was going through that sort of digital transformation, as I think a lot of companies were and are still doing. And that's kind of led me to where I am now.
So, interesting story coming from that background in your student days. And you also said that there isn't really a traditional path anymore. So what advice would you give to a student who's trying to get in the industry, who has all the enthusiasm and drive and a smart tie and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say on that note is to be extremely wary of advice. I think over my years, I've been quite reverent to sort of authority figures and sort of taken advice, a lot of advice. And when I think back about it, I wonder how much of that was actually good advice. And I think probably the majority of it, I would have been better off doing what I thought. And I think that was the first thing that I would really stress is do listen to people, obviously listen to people, but ultimately make up your own mind, because when you're speaking to someone, no one has the same experience you have. There is no two, exact same experiences. So how can, someone's advice be absolutely 100% for what you're doing? But if I was to be pushed on it, I would say, and I think you've touched on part of it already, but the first thing is, to be committed, to be on time, and to be, enthusiastic about things, because that is something that anyone can do, right? You don't need talent, you don't need money, you don't need whatever to be those things. But I think if you are those things, then you're already head and shoulders above, I'm not going to say the majority of people, but certainly a lot of people you see, just in everyday life, are just dialing it in, right? And if you're not, if you are really passionate about something, then I think that really will set you ahead. The second thing I'll say is it's about saying yes. And I think anywhere that I've got, every job that I've got, is because, I've said yes to stuff. And I think, if you're a younger person starting out, you really do have that energy that maybe those of us who are a bit longer in the tooth maybe is on the waning side of things, but you have that energy to be out at, the leaving drinks, or out at the MPI launch, or out at the, the networking event. So say yes to the project, to everything. And then you will garner this sort of reputation of someone who is positive. And who is, willing to put themselves out there, but also at the same time, you're building the network. And ultimately, like I said, every job that I've got has been through a network of people, and kind of demonstrating this ability and willingness to be sort of passionate and to be on the front foot with things.
So you said you've received some bad advice, or you weren't sure the right advice at the time, but. So what are the other bad recommendations that you've had over the years, or what are the bad recos that you think still?
Do you know what? I think I'm really reluctant to say this because he'll probably be listening. But I was recommended by my father, who I admire immensely. I really look up to this individual, and he will definitely listen to this because he's my dad. But he recommended that I went and do history at university, and he recommended it for the right reasons, which was I didn't know what I wanted to do. And history is a fairly, broad subject, but it is academic. And I wish I'd done something that was a little bit more vocational, something that was a little bit more applicable. And I think, like I said, graduating into that sort of environment, something that had a sort of skill set or profession that it led into would have been more beneficial. But in his defense, we have the benefit of 2020 hindsight now, which we obviously didn't have at the time. But yeah, so I think that would probably what I draw upon as an example.
Right. And so how do you kind of spot bad advice, do you think? Because someone who's got 20 years experience on you or whatever, how do you, is it like a second sense you have for it now, or do you take advice now? How does it work? I'm curious. I
do take advice, but ultimately I'll make my own mind up. So I think there's also a thing, right? When you're asking people for advice, you always pick the type of person whose advice you want to hear, right? So you're kind of like you're reinforcing your own biases already. But I think, it is a gut feeling. I think I'm quite headstrong anyway. So now I've decided that to, like I said, be a sponge, do take it on board, do, listen to people, but ultimately it's a gut feeling thing based on your own experience.
So I really like the idea of saying yes. And I think that one of those people that likes to say yes to a lot of things and keep going. But the problem with that is you end up in a situation where you're overwhelmed, where you've said yes to too many things and you can't do everything well. So, and that can lead to sort of panic and bad mental health and all those things. So how do you deal with overwhelm with an attitude of saying yes to as many things as possible?
Well, I mean, obviously you have to apply practical boundaries to that. But I think in terms of what I do, I mean, this is not groundbreaking content here, but the way I deal with, maintaining focus and being overwhelmed is just through exercise. And I'm sure you found this through the podcast for asking similar questions. There's probably a lot of individuals, a lot of people are saying the same things. But I think, under the conditions we're in at the moment, where sort of normal exercise routines have been sort of disrupted, of course, not the worst thing that's going on, but it is noticeable that, not being able to do the same sort of exercise routine is having a noticeable effect on on my mood, my ability to sort of retain and sort of analyze sort of processes and information. And I was thinking sort of in preparation to this sort of podcast, like, what is it about exercise that sort of helps me in this way and helps people generally? And I think there's a physiological element, right? So we all know that exercise releases sort of serotonin and blah, blah, blah. But I think there's also something in the repetitive nature of the actions you're doing, right? So, if you're in marketing, typically you're doing a pretty creative job, which is no 2 days are the same or whatever. And I think there's something in the sort of juxtaposition between that sort of professional, the discipline in your professional life to sort of when you're exercising, which is, simple repetitive motion. And I find very it's like meditation. It's very therapeutic. And also, again, at work, I'm trying to get from A to B really quickly in the most efficient, quickest way the best way that I can. But you can't do that with exercise, right? Especially, I have no natural athletic ability whatsoever. So any improvements that I make are slow and steady and continuous, but they are there. They are real, right? And, and I think there's a real sense of accomplishment when you kind of look back at, maybe 6 weeks of data on how your 5K has improved or whatever it may be. And I think that, and that kind of certainly gives me confidence, and you can really apply that to helps you apply that to other everyday situations, both professionally and personally as well.
The theory I heard relatively recently that I think is super interesting is that the regular repetitive exercise gets you in a state of flow, like running or yoga or whatever it is. But working in marketing definitely does not produce that state in any sense.
But that's why we like it, right? We wouldn't want it to be, we didn't get into marketing to do that kind of thing. But I just think it's that sort of, for me, you're right. It's creating a sort of a flow, which is just different to what I'm doing sort of the other 8 hours of the day. So
what new belief or behavior has improved or changed your work life in the last few years?
I think I'm going to choose my words extremely carefully here.
Is it about your dad again?
Sorry, Dad. No, it's not. But the new belief I have is it's about a dispassionate approach to work, and that I want to be absolutely clear that is not the same as not caring about work. I would define that as not caring too much. And to explain, when I first started at Heineken, I was literally losing sleep over campaigns that are going well. Okay. So you can imagine how bad I was with campaigns that are not doing well. but I was, really thinking about all the calls I'd had that day, or the meetings I'd had that day, or the calls I got tomorrow, or the meetings I got tomorrow, or the presentations, and all this kind of scenario plannings, etc., etc., etc. I don't think this is something that's unique to me. But the problem is like I was just not sleeping at all. And obviously that was really affecting, my mental health, but also the effectiveness of that I was at work. I was stressed out, and I wasn't doing the best job that I could. And it was only when I was able to kind of take a step back and be, like I said, be more dispassionate about it, that I was able to be more objective and not as wedded to ideas. So if someone disagreed with my idea, or my idea didn't work, but it wasn't a personal slight against me, and the world keeps turning, Heineken will still sell beer the next day, we move on. And that goes both ways. So not taking your failures too personally, but equally not taking the successes too seriously, I think is also important, and understanding that it is a team effort, and actually it is, because you have one success, it's you of course celebrate it, but then actually it is about moving on and continually striving for improvement. So I think that has been a mindset shift for me, and I think if I was to rationalize it, it probably comes from a background in DIY and not literal DIY, background in independent sort of companies, and also running my own business as well. When I think every job is a lifestyle to some extent, but when you're running a pub and you're living above the pub, that really is a lifestyle. And the buck stops with you, and you do take it personally because it's your sort of baby. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that, but like I said, can go a little bit too far, and then it becomes a little bit self-defeating.
I was listening to a podcast by Sam Harris.
Oh yeah,
his most recent episode, which is about meditating in this
current
climate, but also that you should download his meditation app. But
of course,
which is quite nice. But one thing he was talking about that really struck me was the idea of separating what's happening with how you feel about what's happening.
Right.
Because you can really, someone can say something that will stress you out, make you upset and angry. But the thing that's actually happening isn't that there's a real world thing that either is or isn't going on, or whatever it is. And then there's your emotional view of it. And when I realized that, it's such a freeing thought to think, right, well, if I just deal with this little gooey emotional bit over here, I can then get back to the actual thing that's really happening.
Absolutely. It's compartmentalizing, right?
Yeah, if you can, but if you're a wildly emotional person, reactive as I am, it's quite difficult. But this podcast is about you, not me. So I'm going to move on. So, what has been the best investment of your time, energy, and money for work in the last few years?
So, I think for me, it is. It's been writing a blog. And for those of you who have read it, they will note that it is a very short blog because it stands at a whopping 2 articles at the moment. However...
What's it called?
Oh, it's just on LinkedIn. It's just a series of articles on LinkedIn.
Right, okay.
But a very short series, again, 2 articles. But for me, I mean, that's been great. I mean, like I said, I've been absolutely stunned really about the impact that has had. I mean, just a very immediate example is I think this probably podcast was born off the back of, I think, one of those articles that I'd put off on LinkedIn, and that's led to all sorts of offers for conference speaking and new customer meetings. So it certainly has opened doors. But also just from a personal level and a more, I guess, introspective thing it's really helped me sort of think about, or take a step back and think about, organize my thoughts around the activity and the stuff that I'm writing about. Really helps me sort of build a story around in a logical and a really succinct way, which I just don't think I would have had otherwise if I hadn't done the same thing. Does that make sense? And I think, and I've just enjoyed doing it more than anything. And I think what it is, people, it's about putting yourself out there, right? And I think, I've always sort of taken the view, let the work speak for itself, and self-promotion is in some way, creepy or a bit gross. But actually, once you get over that and actually realize that no one gives a flying whatever, then, and just get on with it, then it was really quite enlightening, really, and quite, yeah, it's really quite freeing. And I've really enjoyed doing it.
If you love all things innovation and want to understand how brands plan to emerge stronger from the current situation, don't forget to check out MadFest London on the 11th and 12th of November. My good friend Dan at MadFest knows how to put on a cracking event, and there's always plenty of amazing speakers, beer and cool people to meet. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. We're roughly at the halfway stage, so let's move on to your shiny new object, which is growth hacking with an agile mindset.
Talk about grossing people.
So I think I know what that is.
Right.
So can you describe to the audience what your take on that is? Just so someone who doesn't have any understanding of what those words mean, can you explain it for the audience?
Yes, I'll happily murder both of those terms for you and your audience. But on a serious note, so growth hacking is not a shiny new thing for a lot of people, certainly in the startup sort of field. It was, again, doing research for this podcast, it was coined in 2010. So not that new by any stretch of the imagination. But like I said, it was designed for startups. But I think the concept is actually now getting adopted by larger companies like Heineken, and not because they changed their mind or anything. I think there's a structural reason, but the concept of a growth hacker or someone that's head of growth or director of growth is basically their one job is business growth. Okay, so that's their one metric that they have to do is growing the business. Now, if you're an app, that was probably new users or downloads or whatever. But in the concept, in the sort of instance of Heineken, it's obviously selling more stuff, right, or getting more customers. And I think in a startup scenario, you can have one person that can do that. So you can have someone that is in charge of user acquisition, right? In the case of Heineken or any other FMCG company, like it doesn't make as much sense, or it doesn't on the surface of it, because who is responsible for creating more sales? Well, naturally you think it's sales, right? Well, no, not really, because in the case of most FMCGs, you don't really have that direct sort of relationship with this sort of end user or consumer, as we call them. They're selling to customers, right? So, but it's not marketing either, because again, they're not necessarily going to be involved in that sort of B2B element. So it's a little bit more complicated for the sort of traditional kind of areas, whereas especially for people who, like Heineken, have the vast majority of their sales are offline. But the concept of sort of bringing the two together and kind of I think is really interesting, and actually growth above all else in terms of metrics to aim for. But I think I learned about it, the ins and outs of it, through a company called Growth Tribe in Amsterdam a couple of years ago, and I would heartily recommend, if anyone has a couple of days to spend in Amsterdam, which is pleasant at the best of times, I really recommend going on their course. But it really was quite a transformational sort of experience for me. Really kind of opened my eyes to sort of a new way of looking at things, but also
Could you take those 2 days of experience and distill everything you learned into a few short sentences?
Yes.
For those of us who aren't able to go to Amsterdam at the moment.
I can certainly try, but basically, I think the two things for me about it is about, like I said, it's about the growth mindset. It's about the one metric being growth above all else, and it's about empowering an individual to have a full funnel approach to that. So, like I was saying, in Heineken or any other FMCG, you have people responsible for each element of the funnel. This is saying, actually, you can do all this with one person, with one capacity. It's about being task-orientated as opposed to being discipline-orientated. So what I mean is working in cross-functional teams, etc., which is an agile sort of principle. So like a really good example of this is, is planning, right? So I've always had this sort of aversion to planning anything. And I thought this was because I was just lacked attention to detail. But what I've actually come to think of it, and it's through this growth hacking thing, is that actually planning, I don't think is actually that effective, right? Because you come up with a plan and then you just do your campaign based on the plan. And if the campaign doesn't meet the plan, then you say, oh, well, the campaign was rubbish, didn't work. Or you say the campaign's exceeded the plan and everyone pats themselves on the back. But equally, I always struggle to see how the sort of plan and the projections sort of relate to everyday things, okay? But what growth hacking says is actually, and this is where the agile mindset comes in, is we know where we want to get to. We'll put our best people on it. They will test, they will iterate, and they will find where it should get. We've got our best people on the job, and they will do the best thing that they can in order to get to the result. And that was really quite transformational for me because, yeah, like I said, validated my own kind of biases in that regard.
So can you just give us a bit more on like an agile framework and agile mindset? Because some people will be just a bit, I'm not 100% sure I get that. So can you, I don't want you to divulge any company secrets that you can't share, but can you give us an example or a story or an anecdote to help us understand that a bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the agile mindset is a really marketing buzzwordy sort of term.
It's a marketing podcast.
Well, exactly. But when it breaks it down, it's about iteration. Okay, so it's about testing and learning. So a really good example of this is, and this is what one of the articles I wrote was about actually. So you can kind of see the results that I've shared on LinkedIn. So it's about saying, so we start with a central idea of a campaign, which we started, 2 years ago now. We set it live, we test and we learn and we measure. And instead, what we would have done traditionally, or maybe a lot of people would do in terms of campaigns, is say, well, that campaign succeeded or it failed, and then we move on to the next thing. But instead, what we do in an agile mindset is saying, okay, so this element of the campaign worked, we take that and we adapt it, we optimize it, we tweak it, and we move on, and we continually improve the campaign. So the example that a project that I'm working on at the moment, internally we call it Project Flywheel, but what it actually is essentially it's a way of using digital marketing to drive footfall to pubs, and it's just simple ads online. But what we do is we run, like I said, iterative tests. So we're constantly improving the way that we buy media, the way that we target the media, the way that we do the creative, the way that we do the different outlets, the different consumers. And through this, we do mini tests. So 20% of the budget we test, the 80% of the budget is delivery. And then the best performing iteration of test one becomes the baseline for test two. And through that kind of iterative sort of approach, obviously the idea being that your results sort of improve exponentially. And it really does work. I mean, we've taken sort of ROI from about 5.7. So for every pound invested, the retailer takes £5.70 to now over £10.3. So for every pound we invest, the retailer takes £10. And that is through this test, learn, iterate, like I say, constantly moving the baseline up and up and up. So and like I said, I think that is different to the way that we've run campaigns before, where it is A, it's a set and forget, and B, it's a campaign by campaign. This is a sustained approach and a constant learning, a constant iterative moving feast.
So I think we have to mention at this point, because this podcast may well go out, I think, around May time. And yes, we're in the middle of a coronavirus world. And I think it's worth mentioning that you're not doing that now. You're not trying to drive people into pubs, or
no.
That the Heineken company is not in any way trying to get people to not stay safe. I just think that needs to be mentioned. But you're talking about a long time before that. So where did that come from? What was the genesis for that iterative, optimized approach to making ads to drive footfall? What was your kind of light bulb moment? You thought, that'd be an interesting thing to try.
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, footfall to pubs is, and thank you for making that distinction before we move on. But is fundamental to our business, right? So we talk about the three mores, which is more people, more often spending more money. If you're doing one or a couple of those things, or all of those things, then you're basically driving value to your business. So more people is, like I said, getting people through the doors of our pubs and our customers. So it's a really kind of quite fundamental question that we wanted answering, is what is the best way to do it. We started from a place where we had lots of pockets of expertise without kind of having a sort of unified sort of team or sort of project which would kind of bring all these strands together in order to make a sort of unified approach. And it was also about the sort of availability of data and the sort of expertise in terms of data science and sort of creating food. Like I said, this is another principle of Agile, which is cross-functional teams, bringing them together with marketing to actually bring the two disciplines together and actually demonstrate value. So suddenly we can take a data-driven approach to marketing, and actually we can say with confidence what actually we can demonstrate attribution, demonstrate commercial value to us, and of course to our customers as well. So it was kind of like I said, a coming together of sort of a lot of things, a happy accident in some ways, but based on a strategy of trying to make our marketing more data-driven.
So if someone who's listening to this podcast and they think, I like a bit of what Matt's saying here, I'd like to try that, but we're not. We're doing the set and forget. We're doing the the traditional approach. If that person wanted to follow your path to a degree, what are the simple steps that they could take in the near future to try and move in that direction?
The simple thing is, firstly, is get started. Just try some stuff, see what works, lean into what works. That's the most important thing, is getting started. But the basics of it is test and control. And like I said, this is not shouldn't be that complicated. It is creating a test group matched with a like-for-like control group. So in our case, we match pubs in terms of volume size, brand mix, geography, but making sure that you have a representative group. So the test group gets the activity, whatever it may be. The control group, of course, gets nothing. And then just compare the difference. So we use really complicated sales uplift model. And when I say we, certainly not me, but the data science team do that. But you don't have to go to, and through that we can get statistical significance and confidence intervals and all these amazing, weird and wonderful data science teams. But you don't have to go to that level. You can just look at it on a sort of on face value and say, okay, well, test group that got ads ABC performed like this, and the control group that got nothing got this. And that's the basis of it. And from there, you go, okay, what we'll do is we'll change this one thing. And if you change that one thing, that has this effect. So therefore, and that's either better or worse. And then you change tact accordingly. But it really is really important that you do change one little thing at a time. So for example, when we tested it, and this is actually in an article that I wrote on LinkedIn, so you can check it out, is first we tested platforms, then we tested frequency, and then we tested change one little element at a time. And that's really important, because if you change too much, you can't identify which bit's working. So set up your testing control, start simply, and then change one little thing at a time and do continuous improvement. And through that, like, things will get better and better and better. And I genuinely, again, I was blown away by really how effective this methodology is.
Unfortunately, Matt, we're going to have to leave that there. So if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would you like them to do that?
LinkedIn, probably the best way to do it, I think is the stock answer, right? But I'm on LinkedIn all the time. If you want to reach out, be my guest.
And what makes a good reach out to Matt Ricks?
Short, to the point. I mean, no one likes automated. No one likes cold calling, I don't think. Something that's demonstrated that it is genuine is probably the best, would be my recommended approach.
Lovely. Matt, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.